I was 10 years old when my father decided anger was a disease, one that needed to be trained out of me, like a wild dog. It started one evening in the late summer of 1990. The light outside had that golden tint that made everything look too peaceful, too innocent to hold any real danger. My mother was in the kitchen, the radio humming softly with old love songs. I was sitting on the living room floor, building a small wooden fort from old matchboxes and glue, my tongue between my teeth in quiet focus. Then, like every story that changes you, it began with something small. My older brother, Adam, was showing off. He had this habit of getting under my skin, touching things I'd worked hard on, laughing in that way that sounded almost like he wanted to start a fight. He picked up my half-finished fort and turned it upside down. Glue dripped onto the rug. "Don't," I said quietly. He smiled, teasing. "You're too serious, you know that?" When he dropped it, just let it fall. Something inside me cracked. I didn't even think. My hand shut out and shoved him, hard. His head hit the edge of the table, and for a split second, I saw something terrifying. Blood. It was just a small cut, nothing serious, but the sight of it froze me. Adam screamed. My mother came running, her voice rising, her hands fluttering uselessly between us. And then the sound I feared most, the steady, deliberate footsteps of my father coming down the hallway. He never rushed. Not when he was angry, not ever. The slower he walked, the worse it was. He entered the room without a word, his face unreadable. His eyes went first to Adam's cut, then to me. My stomach turned cold. "What happened?" he asked. I opened my mouth, but my mother spoke first. "It was an accident," she said quickly. "They were just playing." He raised a hand, and she went quiet. Then, in a voice so calm that it made my heart race, he said, "Adam, go wash your face." My brother obeyed instantly. The door shut behind him. Now it was just my father and me. He stood there, arms crossed, the soft hum of the radio filling the silence between us. Finally, he said, "Tell me the truth." "I didn't mean to." "Don't lie." "I'm not lying," I blurted out. My voice cracked halfway through. "He ruined my fort. He wouldn't stop." "And so you hit him?" "I just pushed him." He took a slow step toward me, and I could feel the air shift. "That's not control, Daniel." He said my name the way a judge pronounces a sentence. I didn't mean to hurt him," I whispered. He sighed, long and deep, like a man who'd just seen his own reflection in something he didn't want to recognize. Then he knelt down in front of me, his knees cracking softly. For the first time that night, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not rage, not disappointment, but something colder, fear. "When I was your age, my father used to say a man who cannot control his hands will spend his life paying for them." He reached out and took my wrists in his hands. His grip was firm, but not painful. Still, I couldn't move. "You think you're angry now," he said, "but anger isn't power. It's weakness dressed like strength." I didn't understand what he meant. All I knew was the shame burning in my throat. He let go, stood up, and walked around the room, at the broken fort, at the glue drying on the rug, at the bloodstain on the table where Adam had hit his head. "Clean this up," he said quietly, "and come to my study when you're done." That was worse than being yelled at. The study was where lessons happened, the kind that didn't come from school books. When I walked in 10 minutes later, the room was dim, the only light coming from the desk lamp. The smell of leather and tobacco hung in the air. My father sat behind the desk, his posture straight, hands folded. He gestured for me to sit across from him. "I'm not angry with you," he began. "I'm your son.
You have my blood. I understand what's inside you." For a second, I thought that meant he would forgive me, but then his tone changed. And that's exactly why I can't let it go. He leaned forward, eyes hard now. "If I don't teach you control, the world will. And trust me, the world doesn't teach kindly." There was something chilling in the way he said it, like he was trying to protect me by breaking me first. He handed me a small notepad and a pencil. "Write this down," he said. I did. "When I am angry, I am not myself." I hesitated. He watched me closely until I wrote it. "Now again," he said. I wrote it again, and again. He made me fill the entire page. When I reached the end, my hand cramped, my eyes stung. I didn't look up. Every time you lose control, you lose a piece of who you are. A man who can't master his temper can't be trusted, not by others, not even by himself. He paused, then added softly, "I learned that the hard way." For a moment, I thought I saw something almost human in his expression, regret maybe, but it was gone before I could name it. He stood, walked around the desk, and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was meant to be gentle, but it felt heavy, like a chain. He said, "You'll thank me one day. You'll see." When I left his study, the house was silent again. My mother had gone to bed. Adam's door was closed. I went back to the living room, where the floor still smelled faintly of glue. I sat there in the half-dark, staring at the empty space where my fort had been, trying to understand exactly what I'd learned. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't peace. It was control. Cold, quiet, and sharp enough to cut through anything warm left inside me. And that was the night I first realized my father wasn't just teaching me how to behave. He was teaching me how to become him.
After that night, my father stopped speaking to me. Not completely, just enough that it hurt. He still existed in the same rooms, moved through the same house, but his words were rationed like water in a drought. He spoke to my mother, to Adam, even to the dog, but with me, silence became his weapon of choice. At first, I thought he was angry, but it wasn't anger. It was something far worse. It was deliberate. He wanted me to feel the weight of what I'd done, not through punishment, but through absence, through distance. And God, it worked. The days stretched long in that quiet house. My mother tried to soften it with her usual gentleness, extra helpings of dinner, quiet pats on my back, soft, "Don't take it to heart, sweetheart," murmurs, but they didn't reach me. When my father was home, the air felt heavy. His silence filled the rooms like fog. He'd sit at the kitchen table, newspaper open, glasses sliding down his nose. If I entered the room, he wouldn't look up. If I said, "Good morning," he'd nod, maybe once, then go back to reading. No words, no warmth, just silence. Calm, measured, surgical. By the third day, I started to understand what he was doing. He wasn't ignoring me to punish me. He was training me. He wanted me to learn that anger isolates, that it pushes people away until all you have left is your own echo. It was psychological warfare, but I was too young to name it that. At night, I could hear him in his study, the faint click of his typewriter keys echoing through the walls. Sometimes I imagined him writing about me, documenting the process, analyzing the effectiveness of silence as a disciplinary method. Other nights I thought maybe he was just thinking about his own father, the man he never spoke about except in fragments. My old man was strict, but he made me strong. If that was strength, I wondered what weakness looked like. One evening, I made a small mistake, spilled a glass of milk while reaching across the table. The white liquid spread like a quiet explosion across the wood. My mother gasped softly. My father looked up. For a second, our eyes met. I thought he'd shout, or sigh, or maybe even say my name, but he didn't. He just looked at the milk, then back at his plate, and went on eating. Something inside me twisted. I wanted him to yell, to scold me, to do anything that would break that unbearable quiet. Instead, I sat there frozen, my throat burning, while my mother cleaned up with a towel. Afterward, I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, fists clenched, trying not to cry. That's when he appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, just watching. The hallway light framed him in pale gold, like a ghost caught between worlds. "You're angry again," he said finally. His voice was low, calm, almost kind. I didn't answer. He stepped into the room, hands in his pockets. "That's good," he continued. "It means you're still human." I looked up, confused. He came closer, his shadow stretching across the floor, and he said, "What matters," he said, "is what you do with it." He sat on the chair across from me, folding his hands. "Do you know what control really is?" I shook my head. "It's silence," he said. "Not this silence between us, but the silence inside you. The kind that waits, watches, chooses." I didn't understand then, but I remember the way he looked at me, like he was trying to pass something on, something dark and sacred. He said, "Someday, you'll get angry again. Maybe at me, maybe at the world. And when that happens, I want you to remember this week. Remember how silence feels." He paused, his eyes softening for just a heartbeat. "That's control, Daniel. That's power." Then he stood up and left, closing the door gently behind him. The next morning, he spoke to me again, normally, as if nothing had happened. He asked about school, about my bike, about the weather. His voice carried that familiar authority, calm and steady. But something inside me had shifted. I answered politely, but carefully, measuring every word. I watched the way he moved, the way his eyes followed small details, how I held my fork, how I walked, how I breathed. I started to mimic his calmness, his restraint. It was strange how quickly silence became part of me. A week later, I saw Adam throw a tantrum over something small, a missing comic book. He shouted, kicked the chair, stormed off. My father didn't move. He just glanced at me instead. Our eyes met for a brief second, and I knew what that look meant. "See? That's what you used to be." Something about it made me proud and sick all at once. That night, as I brushed my teeth, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face looked smaller somehow, tighter, older. My jaw was clenched the way his always was. I tried to smile. I couldn't. All I saw staring back was control. Cold, perfect, and empty.
The lesson didn't end that week. It never really ended. It just changed shape. From silence into something quieter, deeper. At first, I thought I had mastered control. I stopped shouting. I stopped reacting. When kids at school teased me, I kept my face blank. When Adam borrowed my things without asking, I said nothing. My father's approval lingered in the background of my mind like a shadow on the wall, invisible, but always there. He never praised me directly, but sometimes, when I stayed calm while others didn't, I'd catch a flicker of pride in his eyes. It was fleeting, like the brief light of a match, but it was enough to keep me going. That became my fuel, the rare, silent acknowledgement that I was doing what he taught me. But the thing about silence is, it grows. It spreads into corners of your life you never intended it to reach. By the time I was 12, I had become a quiet boy. Too quiet. Teachers described me as disciplined, mature for his age. My mother said I was thoughtful. But I wasn't thoughtful. I was careful. I had learned that words were dangerous, that emotion was a kind of weakness that could turn people against you. And yet, inside me, something was building. A pressure, like static behind glass. It started small. I'd feel it when my father corrected me for minor things. The way I held a fork, the way I stood, the way I answered a question too quickly. "You rush," he'd say calmly. "Control your pace." And I would nod, jaw tight, hands still. But every time a small spark of resentment flickered in my chest, too faint to see, too stubborn to die. I remember one night vividly, a storm outside, rain ticking against the window. My father had asked me to polish his shoes for the morning. It was a simple task, one I'd done a dozen times. But my mind was somewhere else that night, thinking about a drawing I'd made at school. My art teacher had said I had real talent, that I should consider entering a competition. I'd been excited to tell my father. I thought, maybe this time he'd smile. Maybe he'd be proud. But when I showed him, he barely looked at it. "Nice," he said, setting it aside. "Now, go finish my shoes." Just like that. I remember staring at the paper, the charcoal smudges, the hours I'd spent. My chest burned, but I said nothing. Instead, I went to the hallway, pulled out the shoebox, and began to polish. The smell of leather and wax filled the air. The rhythmic motion of the cloth should have calmed me, but it didn't. Each circular stroke made me angrier. Not at the task, but at the emptiness of it. At him. When I finally finished, I stood up too fast. The chair fell over. The sound cracked through the quiet like thunder. My father appeared in the doorway almost instantly. He didn't shout. He didn't even frown. He just looked at the chair, then at me. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing," I said quickly. He stared at me, not with anger, but disappointment. That look again, the one that made me feel smaller than air. "Control, Daniel. Always control." And he turned and walked away. That was the first time I wanted to break something. Not because I was angry at him, but because I was angry at myself for needing his approval so badly. I stood there in the hallway, fists clenched, shaking. The walls felt like they were closing in. Every lesson he taught me, patience, restraint, silence, suddenly felt like chains. But still, I said nothing. That night, I lay awake listening to the rain. It tapped against the glass like fingers trying to get in. I thought about all the things I wanted to say to him. How his silence had made me afraid of my own voice. How every calm word he spoke felt like a door closing. I whispered them into the dark just to hear the sound. My voice cracked, rusty from disuse. And for a moment, I imagined what it would be like to scream.
to break something, to let it all out. But I didn't, because I could already hear him in my head. Control, Daniel. So I swallowed the words. Again. Weeks passed. Months. Life went on. But the silence between us never disappeared. It just became invisible. Normal. Like air you learn to breathe without thinking. Until one day, it broke. It was summer, and the heat made everything stick. Skin, clothes, tempers. Adam had borrowed my Walkman without asking. I found it on the floor of his room, cracked. Something snapped inside me. I stormed into his room, shouting, grabbing his shoulders. My voice, loud, raw, alien, filled the space like fire. Then I felt it, a strong hand gripping my arm. My father. He pulled me back so fast I almost fell. His eyes, cold, steady, locked onto mine. Enough, he said. But this time, I didn't stop. No, I said. You always say control, but you never listen. You never talk. You just... I didn't finish. Because in that instant, his hand rose. Not a slap, not quite. Just a sharp, precise motion across my face. Enough to sting, enough to silence me. We both froze. The sound echoed in the room, swallowed by the thick summer air. Adam stared. My mother called from the kitchen. Nobody moved. Then my father stepped back, straightened his collar, and said quietly, "You lost control," and walked away. I stood there, my cheek burning, my heart pounding. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. That was the breaking point. Not because of the slap, but because I realized something that night. He didn't teach control to protect me. He taught it to replicate himself. To make sure his world of silence, of power, of distance didn't end with him. And the worst part? It worked. Because even as I stood there, fists trembling, part of me felt guilty. Not for shouting, but for disappointing him.
It's strange how memories age. They don't fade. They harden, like glass left out in the cold. You stop remembering them as moments, and they start living inside you as truths. Years passed after that summer. By the time I turned 18, my father and I had become strangers, living under one roof. The silence between us had matured into something almost dignified. Two men coexisting, each pretending the other was fine. He still spoke in short, measured sentences, still corrected small things, the way I set a glass, the tone I used, the pauses between my words, and I still obeyed, out of habit, not respect. But every time he corrected me, I heard the echo of that night. You lost control. And every time I bit my tongue to keep the peace, I heard another voice, quieter, but mine. What if control isn't peace at all? When I left for college, I didn't say goodbye. Not really. He stood at the gate, hands behind his back, eyes sharp and unreadable. He said, "Work hard and remember who you are." I nodded, carrying my single suitcase, full of clothes and the silence too heavy to pack. It wasn't until years later, after he was gone, that I started to hear his voice differently. The morning after his funeral, I sat in his study, the same room I used to avoid as a child. The air still smelled of old paper and aftershave. The sunlight hit the wooden desk the way it always had, turning the desk into tiny floating stars. Everything in that room was in order. Every book lined perfectly, every pen capped, every memory
preserved in discipline. On the desk was his journal, a small black leather notebook, the kind he never let anyone touch. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. The handwriting was precise, neat, sharp, just like him. At first, it was full of lists, work meetings, dates, numbers, notes about finances. But halfway through, the tone changed. The sentences softened. One entry caught me off guard. It was dated the night I shouted at him, the night he slapped me. June 14th. Daniel lost his temper today. I saw myself in him. Too much of myself. I hit him. I thought it would teach him control, but it felt like watching a mirror crack. He looked at me not with fear, but pain. The same pain I once felt from my own father. Maybe the lesson was never about control. Maybe it was about what control costs. I remember staring at those words for a long time, unable to breathe. My hands shook, not from anger, but from something deeper. All my life I had believed he never understood me, that his silence was cold, deliberate, unbreakable. But now I saw it for what it really was, a wound he never learned to heal. He had passed it down to me the only way he knew how, through discipline. The realization didn't bring peace. It brought grief. Because suddenly I understood that every lesson, every punishment, every quiet stare came not from cruelty, but from fear. Fear of weakness, fear of emotion, fear of becoming the man his own father had been. And in trying not to repeat that pain, he became a version of it, anyway. That night, I sat by the window of his study, the same window I'd once looked through as a boy, counting stars, waiting for his approval. The rain tapped softly against the glass, just like it used to. And I whispered, "I forgive you." Not because it erased what happened, but because I finally understood why it did. As I grew older, I started noticing his reflection in the small things I did, the way I spoke to people, the way I avoided confrontation by using calmness as armor, the way I stayed silent when something hurt me, pretending it didn't. Control had become second nature, but control without compassion is just another form of fear. I realized that every time I silenced my feelings, I wasn't being disciplined, I was being afraid. Afraid of losing someone's respect. Afraid of repeating his mistakes. So I began to unlearn. Slowly, painfully. I started by speaking more. Small words. Honest words. When my own son was born, I promised myself something. I would never let silence teach him love couldn't. One evening, when he was about 8, he accidentally broke a vase in the living room. It was old, a family heirloom. He froze, waiting for me to explode. I saw the same fear in his eyes that I once had, and in that instant, I saw my father. But this time, I chose differently. I knelt down, picked up the pieces with him, and said softly, "It's just glass. We can fix things, remember?" He nodded, tears trembling in his eyes. That night, when I tucked him into bed, he whispered, "Dad, are you mad at me?" I smiled, the kind of smile my father never gave. "No, son," I said. "I'm proud of you for being honest." And in that moment, I realized that this was the lesson I had always wanted to learn. Not control, not silence, but grace. Sometimes I still dream about him, my father. In those dreams, I'm back in that hallway, the night of the storm. He's standing there, his face half in shadow, his voice calm as ever. But now, I don't see anger in his eyes. I see exhaustion, regret, maybe even love hidden under the armor of pride. And when I wake up, the sound of his footsteps still echoes in my mind. Steady, familiar, haunting. Only now they don't scare me. They remind me of where I came from and of how far I've come since then. Because sometimes the hardest part of becoming a better man is forgiving the man who taught you how.